Print, email, Facebook, Twitter. More. Canberra John Paynter calls for euthanasia legalization to stop others from his wife's torture. John Paynter loved his wife Mary Ann so much that in her final days he thought about killing her. She battled cancer for years, but it's her last 7 days that still haunt him. The last thing she said to me with big blue eyes, she said, "I'm scared," he said. She was just so strong, she never did that. For a week at the Canberra hospital just over 2 years ago, Mrs. Paynter clung to life in palliative care. She was constantly struggling to breathe. She was coughing, she was groaning, she was moaning, he said. Sometimes she'd scream. I did think of smothering her, but then I just couldn't bring myself to do it. That's how desperate you get. He asked if doctors could perform surgery for the chance she'd die on the table, but he was told the risk was too great and staff could do no harm. It would have been a good way to go, instead of a week of horrible suffering, he said. He begged for more morphine but was again told the risk of death was too high. Then there's the sedatives, and they said no, she's already had one, we can't give her any more. God forbid she gets addicted. There's no logic. Mr. Paynter now suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder from witnessing what he describes as torture. I had a cat that died, he said. If my vet had done to my cat exactly what the Canberra hospital did to my wife, they would lose their license and likely be in jail. They plan to go out together. Mr. Paynter is one of dozens of Canberrans calling for their right to choose to die. An ACT Legislative Assembly inquiry into end-of-life choices received a record number of submissions and began hearing evidence this week. Mr. Paynter says changing the laws in the ACT is his main purpose in life. Now that his wife is gone, we had decided years ago we were going to go out together when we got really old, he said. She was my soulmate of 38 years. Annual 70, is also determined to make her own decisions about dying. She watched her elderly parents die two very different deaths, one luckier than the other. Her father died suddenly while on a family holiday to the beach. After bathing in the water and sitting down on a rock, he slipped into a coma and died a few hours later. Whereas my mother died of starvation and organ shutdown over a number of weeks, she said. We suffered watching her suffer. She says she's been affected by David Goodall's recent journey to Switzerland to end his life at 104, surrounded by family. It struck me then that I probably won't have the financial resources, particularly by his age, to do that, she said. Assisted dying advocates say it's that inequity that leaves some people contemplating violent deaths. Focus on palliative care. But Calvary Healthcare, a Catholic not-for-profit and the main provider of palliative care in the ACT, says governments should be focusing on funding palliative care over assisted dying. Director of Palliative Care Suhasha Kanathigoda says he's only ever had a few patients ask about the issue. If I find out the reasons behind it and I can put something in place to alleviate the issue, I think most of the time they will actually change their mind, he said. A lot of people lack the knowledge of what palliative care can provide. Calvary says it will not offer assisted dying if it is legalized in the ACT. It definitely isn't a religious issue. We don't believe in assisted dying because we believe we can actually manage most of the symptoms, he said. Dr. Kanathigoda is concerned about elder abuse and older or sick people being coerced to take part. There is a possibility that people might be either coerced into it or might feel guilty about worrying others and might actually take that option, he said. He says while governments are beginning to invest in palliative care, more resources are needed. I'm talking about infrastructure, human resources, equipment, he said. I think we can actually provide a better service to our community, thereby reducing the need of our community to access assisted dying. About 47% of the 487 submissions to the inquiry argue against assisted dying, while 42% support it. The majority of the submissions from health-related organizations don't present a position either way. Of the 5 health groups arguing against assisted dying in their submissions, 4 have a religious affiliation. Polling shows between 65 and 80% of people believe they should have the choice to access assisted dying. Federal government roadblock regardless of the inquiry's findings. The ACT government is prevented from legislating for assisted dying because of a 2-decade-old federal bill introduced by Conservative MP Kevin Andrews. It was done in response to the Northern Territory legalizing euthanasia in 1995, under a constitutional power that allows the federal government to make any laws for the territories. The federal government has previously said it does not intend to repeal the bill. However, Greens leader Richard D. Natale and Liberal Democrat David Leyonhjelm have their own private legislation before the Senate to reverse it. Human Rights Commissioner Helen Watchers believes the law limits the human rights of Canberrans by restricting their ability to participate in public life. She says the constitutional power should ultimately be removed. It's a very old constitutional power.